Greek verbs. Said to be wild, untamable, impossible to learn. Words like aoristos, υποτακτική and παρατατικός have been terrorizing Greek students for centuries. But that's enough. Today we are here to put an end to this centuries-long struggle and finally master Greek verbs once and for all. Εντάξει, πλάκα κάνω. Τα πράγματα δεν είναι τόσο τραγικά. Τα ρήματα στα ελληνικά είναι δύσκολα, αλλά όχι ακατόρθωτα. Εάν είναι η πρώτη σου φορά εδώ, σε καλωσορίζω στο κανάλι μου Crazy for Greek, το οποίο είναι αφιερωμένο σε όλους τους λάτρεις της ελληνικής γλώσσας που ονειρεύονται να μάθουν ελληνικά. Με το σημερινό βίντεο θέλω να σου προσφέρω έναν ολοκληρωμένο οδηγό ώστε να μπορείς να χειρίζεσαι καλύτερα τα ελληνικά ρήματα. Ας ξεκινήσουμε. If you've been with me for a while, you know that I speak almost exclusively in Greek in my videos. The reason is that I want to create the best possible environment for you to be exposed to Greek and to learn naturally. But today I will make an exception and speak in English, because I want to make absolutely sure that everything you hear today sinks in clearly. And if at any point you find my accent in English hard to follow, just turn on the subtitles. Without further delay, let's dive right into the world of Greek verbs. Before we begin, I advise you to download the guide that I prepared for you, where I summarize all the information contained in this video. The link is in the description. To begin with, a Greek verb can assume one of these 12 forms. It may seem a lot at first glance, but if we take a closer look, we realize that we only have one present tense, 4 simple forms, 4 continuous forms, and 3 perfect forms. This simplifies things a lot because most of these forms are closely correlated. In fact, if one knows the present tense, the simple subjunctive, and the past continuous, they can derive everything else just by changing the ending and by paying attention to the position of the stress. Regarding the use of these forms, we are lucky because the way we use them in Greek is extremely common to the way we use them in English. In this video, we will focus only on how to form all these tenses. If you want to know more details about their use, I have a separate video for each one of them in my channel. We will divide the rest of the video in 3 sections. First, we will talk about the present tense. Then, we will talk about the simple tenses along with the perfect tenses. And finally, we will talk about the continuous forms. Let's begin with the present tense. In Greek, we have 2 types of verbs. We have verbs that end with omega, which we call active verbs, and verbs that end with me, which we call passive verbs. In this video, we will talk only about active verbs, and we will leave passive verbs for another video. As we said, all active verbs in Greek end with omega. But sometimes this omega is unstressed, like in the verbs κάνω, παίζω, θέλω, πιστεύω. Sometimes it's stressed, like in the verbs προσπαθώ, μπορώ, ζω, αργώ. And sometimes the verb ends with ao, like in the verbs μιλάω, αγαπάω, κοιτάω, ζητάω. Verbs ending with omega unstressed are conjugated as follows. Κάνω, κάνεις, κάνει, κάνουμε, κάνετε, κάνουν or κάνουνε. Verbs ending with omega stressed are conjugated as follows. Μπορώ, μπορείς, μπορεί, μπορούμε, μπορείτε, μπορούν or μπορούνε. Verbs ending with ao are conjugated as follows. Μιλάω, μιλάς, μιλά or μιλάει, μιλάμε, μιλάτε, μιλάν or μιλάνε. 99% of Greek verbs are conjugated with one of the 3 ways we just described, but there are some very few verbs ending with omega unstressed that have a vowel before omega, like the verb ακούω, for example. If we conjugate the verb ακούω like the verb κάνω, we have Ακούω, ακούεις, ακούει, ακούμε, ακούετε, ακούνε. These consecutive vowel sounds don't sound very nice, so we shrink them a bit. And we have ακούω, ακούς, ακούει, ακούμε, ακούτε, ακούν or ακούνε. The rest of the verbs that behave like ακούω are the following. Τρώω, λέω, κλαίω, φταίω, καίω. Now we can conjugate any active Greek verb we wish. Let's practice a bit. In the file that you can download from the description, you can find a list of the most common Greek verbs. Let's take the verb διαβάζω, for example. The omega of the verb διαβάζω is unstressed, so it behaves exactly as the verb κάνω. We have διαβάζω, διαβάζεις, διαβάζει, διαβάζουμε, διαβάζετε, διαβάζουν or διαβάζουνε. Now let's take the verb προσπαθώ. The omega of the verb προσπαθώ is stressed, so it will behave like the verb μπορώ. We have προσπαθώ, προσπαθείς, προσπαθεί, προσπαθούμε, προσπαθείτε, προσπαθούν or προσπαθούνε. Now let's take the verb ρωτάω. Ρωτάω ends with άω, so it will behave like μιλάω. We have ρωτάω, ρωτάς, ρωτάει, ρωτάμε, ρωτάτε, ρωτάν or ρωτάνε. And finally, let's take the verb τρώω. As we saw, τρώω belongs to the small category of verbs that behave like ακούω. So we have τρώω, τρως, τρώει, τρώμε, τρώτε, τρών or τρώνε. If you want to practice more, in the file that you can download from the description, you can find a large number of common verbs, so you can practice as much as you want. If you enjoy the way I teach Greek here on my channel and you would like to take your learning a step further, I would like to let you know that I also offer private lessons. In these one-on-one sessions, I can really adapt everything to your goals and help you progress faster. If that sounds like something you would be interested in, you will find a link in the description with more information. Let's get back to the video. Now that we are done with the present tense, time to learn the simple forms, starting with the simple subjunctive. As we know, Greek active verbs are divided into three categories. Verbs that end with omega unstressed, verbs that end with omega stressed, and verbs that end with ao. But we are lucky because verbs that end with omega stressed and verbs that end with ao behave differently only in the present tense. In the rest of the forms, we treat them as if they were one category. Let's begin by explaining how we can form the simple subjunctive of verbs that end with omega unstressed. In this type of verbs, we have to look at the letter or sound that comes before the final omega. This letter will be converted in one of the three letters, sigma, xi, psi. If the letter before omega is a vowel, ni, zeta, or theta, it will be converted into sigma. If before omega we have one of these letters or combinations, it will be converted into xi. And finally, if we have one of these letters or combinations, it will be converted into psi. It may look a bit chaotic at first glance, but let's take a closer look. These combinations are quite rare, so we can even ignore them for the moment. As for the sounds k, r, h, hnu, we notice that they come from the throat, so they are quite easy to recognize. Regarding the sounds that are converted into psi, they are all sounds that we produce with the lips. P, v, f, ptu, ftu, ev, ef, av, af. One more thing that we observe is that the letter zeta has two possibilities. In some verbs it is converted into sigma, and in other verbs it is converted into xi. Let's put all this into practice now in order to make sure that we understand it well. let's try to form the simple subjunctive of the verbs νιώθω, αφήνω, χάνω, κλείνω, πληρώνω, τελειώνω, ακούω. In the verb νιώθω, before omega, we have th, which be converted into sigma. Νιώσω. In the verbs αφήνω, χάνω, κλείνω, πληρώνω, τελειώνω, we have the letter νι, which also will be converted into sigma. Αφήσω, χάσω, κλείσω, πληρώσω, τελειώσω. As for the word ακούω, we have the sound u, which is the sound of a vowel. In this case, we will not replace it with sigma, but we will add the sigma after the vowel. Ακούσω. Now, let's try to form the simple subjunctive of the verbs γράφω, δουλεύω, μαγειρεύω, ταξιδεύω. In the letter γράφω, we have a φ before omega, a sound that we produce with the lips, φ. Therefore, it will be converted into ψ, γράψω. In the verbs δουλεύω, μαγειρεύω, ταξιδεύω, we have the sound β before omega, another sound that we produce with the lips. So, the sound β will be converted into the sound ψ, δουλέψω, μαγειρέψω, ταξιδέψω. Now, let's try to form the simple subjunctive of the verbs τρέχω, ανοίγω, δείχνω, ρίχνω, φτιάχνω, ψάχνω. All the sounds before omega are sounds that we produce with the throat, so they will be converted into ξ. Τρέξω, ανοίξω, δείξω, ρίξω, φτιάξω, ψάξω. Finally, let's try to form the simple subjunctive of the verbs αρχίζω, διαβάζω, ετοιμάζω, κοιτάζω, παίζω, αλλάζω. In all these verbs, before omega, we have the letter zeta. In the first three words, it will be converted into su. Αρχίσω, διαβάσω, ετοιμάσω. In the other three verbs, it will be converted into ξου. Κοιτάξω, παίξω, αλλάξω. But wait a second. What about the rest of the persons? Can we use the same endings as in the present tense? Yes, we can use the same endings as in the present tense. So if we want to conjugate the verb διαβάζω, for example, in simple subjunctive, we have διαβάσω, διαβάσεις, διαβάσει, διαβάσουμε, διαβάσετε, διαβάσουν or διαβάσουνε. Now that we know how to form the simple subjunctive of verbs that end with omega unstressed, let's do the same for the verbs that end in omega stressed and the verbs that end in ao. In this case, things are much easier because the only thing we have to do is to take out the ending, the omega, add is stressed, and then use the same endings that we use in order to form the simple subjunctive of verbs that end in omega unstressed. Let's try to do it. Let's try to form the simple subjunctive of the verbs ανησυχώ, εξηγώ, ζω, προσπαθώ, χρησιμοποιώ, συμφωνώ, αγαπάω, απαντάω, βοηθάω, ζητάω, μιλάω, νικάω. If we take out the ending, we add is stressed and then the ending omega, we have ανησυχήσω, εξηγήσω, ζήσω, προσπαθήσω, χρησιμοποιήσω, συμφωνήσω, αγαπήσω, απαντήσω, βοηθήσω, ζητήσω, μιλήσω, νικήσω. In some rare cases, instead of is, we add s or as. For example, the simple subjunctive of the verb μπορώ, it's not μπορήσω, but μπορέσω. And the simple subjunctive of the verb γελάω, it's not γελήσω, but γελάσω. But these are quite rare cases. As for the rest of the persons, as we said, we use the same endings that we used in order to form the simple subjunctive of the verbs that end in omega unstressed. Let's try to conjugate the verb ζω in simple subjunctive. We have ζήσω, ζήσεις, ζήσει, ζήσουμε, ζήσετε, ζήσουν or ζήσουνε. Now that we know how to form the simple subjunctive, you would be surprised by how easily we can form the simple future, the simple past, the simple imperative, the present perfect, the past perfect, and the future perfect in a matter of seconds. Let's begin with the simple future. The simple future is exactly the same as the simple subjunctive, but we add the word tha before. As for the simple past, it's also the same as the subjunctive, but in this case we use the endings of the past and we put the stress in the third syllable from the end. If the verb has only 2 syllables, we add one extra e at the beginning in order to have 3 syllables. Let's see which are these endings of the past with an example. Let's form the simple past of the verb διαβάζω, which is διάβασα, διάβασες, διάβασε, διαβάσαμε, διαβάσατε, διαβάσανε or διάβασαν. Let's move to the simple imperative. The imperative in Greek has only 2 persons, one in singular and one in plural. In singular, the simple imperative is exactly the same as the third person of the simple past. But if we added an extra e in order to form the simple past, we take it out in simple imperative. As for the plural, it's the same as the singular, but we add an extra taf before the final epsilon, and the stress is always on the second syllable from the end. Let's move to the perfect tenses. In order to form the perfect tenses, as in English, we need a past participle, which in Greek is always the third person of the simple subjunctive. We form the present perfect using the verb έχω and then the past participle. We form the past perfect using the past of the verb έχω, είχα, and we form the future perfect using the future of the verb έχω, θα έχω. Now let's put everything into practice. These are the verbs that we have practiced so far, and this is their simple subjunctive that we already know how to form. In order to form the simple future, we just add the word θα. Θα νιώσω, θα αφήσω, θα χάσω, θα κλείσω, θα πληρώσω, θα τελειώσω, θα ακούσω, θα γράψω, θα δουλέψω, θα μαγειρέψω, θα ταξιδέψω, θα τρέξω, θα ανοίξω, θα δείξω, θα ρίξω, θα φτιάξω, θα ψάξω, θα αρχίσω, θα διαβάσω, θα ετοιμάσω, θα κοιτάξω, θα παίξω, θα αλλάξω, θα ανησυχήσω, θα εξηγήσω, θα ζήσω, θα προσπαθήσω, θα χρησιμοποιήσω, θα συμφωνήσω, θα αγαπήσω, θα απαντήσω, θα βοηθήσω, θα ζητήσω, θα μιλήσω, θα νικήσω, θα μπορέσω, θα γελάσω. In order to form the simple past, we change the ending, we use the ending of the past, a, and we put the stress on the third syllable from the end. Ένιωσα, άφησα, έχασα, έκλεισα, πλήρωσα, τέλειωσα, άκουσα, έγραψα, δούλεψα, μαγείρεψα, ταξίδεψα, έτρεξα, άνοιξα, έδειξα, έριξα, έφτιαξα, έψαξα, άρχισα, διάβασα, ετοίμασα, κοίταξα, έπαιξα, άλλαξα, ανησύχησα, εξήγησα, έζησα, προσπάθησα, χρησιμοποίησα, συμφώνησα, αγάπησα, απάντησα, βοήθησα, ζήτησα, μίλησα, νίκησα, μπόρεσα, γέλασα. The simple imperative is exactly the same as the third person of simple past, but if we added an extra e at the beginning, we take it out. Νιώσε, άφησε, χάσε, κλείσε, πλήρωσε, τέλειωσε, άκουσε, γράψε, δούλεψε, μαγείρεψε, ταξίδεψε, τρέξε, άνοιξε, δείξε, ρίξε, φτιάξε, ψάξε, άρχισε, διάβασε, ετοίμασε, κοίταξε, παίξε, άλλαξε, ανησύχησε, εξήγησε, ζήσε, προσπάθησε, χρησιμοποίησε, συμφώνησε, αγάπησε, απάντησε, βοήθησε, ζήτησε, μίλησε, νίκησε. The verb μπορώ, can, is not used in imperative, same as in English. Γέλασε. And in order to form the plural, we just add an extra taf before the e, but we put the stress always on the second syllable from the end. Νιώστε, αφήστε, χάστε, κλείστε, πληρώστε, τελειώστε, ακούστε, γράψτε, δουλέψτε, μαγειρέψτε, ταξιδέψτε, τρέξτε, ανοίξτε, δείξτε, ρίξτε, φτιάξτε, ψάξτε, αρχίστε, διαβάστε, ετοιμάστε, κοιτάξτε, παίξτε, αλλάξτε, ανησυχήστε, εξηγήστε, ζήστε, προσπαθήστε, χρησιμοποιήστε, συμφωνήστε, αγαπήστε, απαντήστε, βοηθήστε, ζητήστε, μιλήστε, νικήστε, γελάστε. And finally, in order to form the perfect tenses, we use the third person of the simple subjunctive as past participle and the verb έχω in past είχα and in future θα έχω. Έχω νιώσει, είχα νιώσει, θα έχω νιώσει. Έχω αφήσει, είχα αφήσει, θα έχω αφήσει. Έχω χάσει, είχα χάσει, θα έχω χάσει. Έχω κλείσει, είχα κλείσει, θα έχω κλείσει. Έχω πληρώσει, είχα πληρώσει, θα έχω πληρώσει. Έχω τελειώσει, είχα τελειώσει, θα έχω τελειώσει. Έχω ακούσει, είχα ακούσει, θα έχω ακούσει. Έχω γράψει, είχα γράψει, θα έχω γράψει. Έχω δουλέψει, είχα δουλέψει, θα έχω δουλέψει. Έχω μαγειρέψει, είχα μαγειρέψει, θα έχω μαγειρέψει. Έχω ταξιδέψει, είχα ταξιδέψει, θα έχω ταξιδέψει. Έχω τρέξει, είχα τρέξει, θα έχω τρέξει. Έχω ανοίξει, είχα ανοίξει, θα έχω ανοίξει. Έχω δείξει, είχα δείξει, θα έχω δείξει. Έχω ρίξει, είχα ρίξει, θα έχω ρίξει. Έχω φτιάξει, είχα φτιάξει, θα έχω φτιάξει. Έχω ψάξει, είχα ψάξει, θα έχω ψάξει. Έχω αρχίσει, είχα αρχίσει, θα έχω αρχίσει. Έχω διαβάσει, είχα διαβάσει, θα έχω διαβάσει. Έχω ετοιμάσει, είχα ετοιμάσει, θα έχω ετοιμάσει. Έχω κοιτάξει, είχα κοιτάξει, θα έχω κοιτάξει. Έχω παίξει, είχα παίξει, θα έχω παίξει. Έχω αλλάξει, είχα αλλάξει, θα έχω αλλάξει. Έχω ανησυχήσει, είχα ανησυχήσει, θα έχω ανησυχήσει. Έχω εξηγήσει, είχα εξηγήσει, θα έχω εξηγήσει. Έχω ζήσει, είχα ζήσει, θα έχω ζήσει. Έχω προσπαθήσει, είχα προσπαθήσει, θα έχω προσπαθήσει. Έχω χρησιμοποιήσει, είχα χρησιμοποιήσει, θα έχω χρησιμοποιήσει. Έχω συμφωνήσει, είχα συμφωνήσει, θα έχω συμφωνήσει. Έχω αγαπήσει, είχα αγαπήσει, θα έχω αγαπήσει. Έχω απαντήσει, είχα απαντήσει, θα έχω απαντήσει. Έχω βοηθήσει, είχα βοηθήσει, θα έχω βοηθήσει. Έχω ζητήσει, είχα ζητήσει, θα έχω ζητήσει. Έχω μιλήσει, είχα μιλήσει, θα έχω μιλήσει. Έχω νικήσει, είχα νικήσει, θα έχω νικήσει. The verb μπορώ is not very common to see it in these tenses, but regardless we have. Έχω μπορέσει, είχα μπορέσει, θα έχω μπορέσει. Έχω γελάσει, είχα γελάσει, θα έχω γελάσει. Of course, it's not obligatory for someone to learn first the simple subjunctive. Someone else may first learn the simple future or the simple past, and then based on that, it's simple to form all the other simple and perfect forms. The important thing is that through practice, you will be able to switch between all these forms with ease. So, when you speak in real life, they come to you automatically. In addition to all these verbs that we practice together, you can find many more common verbs in the file that you can download from the description. Practice, practice, practice. Now that we know how to form the present tense, the simple forms, and the perfect forms, we are left only with the continuous forms. Let's begin with the continuous subjunctive, which is exactly the same as the present tense. Regarding the continuous future, we just add the word tha to the continuous subjunctive or to the present tense because they are the same. Let's move to the continuous past. The continuous past of verbs that end with omega unstressed is the same as the continuous subjunctive or the present tense because they are the same, but we use the endings of the past and we put the stressed on the third syllable from the end. If the verb has only 2 syllables, we add one extra e at the beginning in order to have 3 syllables. As for verbs that end with omega stressed and verbs that end with ao, in order to form their continuous past, we add us, always stressed, and then the ending of the past. The endings of the past are the same endings that we use to form the simple past. So if we want to form the continuous past of the verb διαβάζω, we have διάβαζα, διάβαζες, διάβαζε, διαβάζαμε, διαβάζατε, διαβάζανε, or διάβαζαν. And if we want to form the continuous past of the verb μιλάω, we have μιλούσα, μιλούσες, μιλούσε, μιλούσαμε, μιλούσατε, μιλούσαν, or μιλούσανε. Be careful with the 6 verbs that use the contracted endings in the present tense, because with these verbs we add an extra γ before the ending of the past for phonetic reasons. For example, the continuous past of the verb τρώω is not έτρωα, but έτρωγα. Έτρωγα, έτρωγες, έτρωγε, τρώγαμε, τρώγατε, τρώγανε, or έτρωγαν. Finally, we move to the continuous imperative. In singular, verbs that end in omega non-stressed behave differently from the verbs that end with omega stressed or the verbs that end in ao. The continuous imperative in singular of verbs that end with omega unstressed is the same as the third person of continuous past. But if we added an extra e to form the continuous past, we take it out. As for the rest of the verbs, we just use the ending a, and we put the stressed on the second syllable from the end. Be aware that with the verbs that end with omega stressed, we almost never use the continuous imperative in singular. We use almost exclusively the simple imperative. As for the plural of the continuous imperative, for all verbs, it's the same as the second person in plural of the present tense. Time to put everything into practice. These are the verbs that we have practiced so far, and this is their continuous subjunctive. It's exactly the same as the present tense. There is no reason to go through the list. Now let's try to form the continuous future. Once more, it's exactly the same as the present tense, but with the word tha. There is no point again to go through the list. Now let's try to form the continuous past of these verbs. All these verbs are verbs that end with omega unstressed. So the continuous past will be the same as the present tense, but with the ending of the past and the stress on the third syllable from the end. Ένιωθα, άφηνα, έχανα, έκλεινα, πλήρωνα, τέλειωνα, άκουγα, έγραφα, δούλευα, μαγείρευα, ταξίδευα, έτρεχα, άνοιγα, έδειχνα, έριχνα, έφτιαχνα, έψαχνα, άρχιζα, διάβαζα, ετοίμαζα, κοίταζα, έπαιζα, άλλαζα. Now let's try to form the continuous past of these verbs, which are all verbs that end with omega stressed or in ao. In this case, we always use us stressed and then the ending of the past. Ανησυχούσα, εξηγούσα, ζούσα, προσπαθούσα, χρησιμοποιούσα, συμφωνούσα, αγαπούσα, απαντούσα, βοηθούσα, ζητούσα, μιλούσα, νικούσα, μπορούσα, γελούσα. Finally, let's try to form the continuous imperative of our verbs. First, we have the verbs that end with omega unstressed. In this case, the continuous imperative will be the same as the third person of the continuous past, but if we added an extra e to form the continuous past, we take it out in imperative. Be aware that some of these verbs are almost never used in continuous imperative, so we will just omit these forms. We have κλείνε, πλήρωνε, τέλειωνε, άκουγε, γράφε, δούλευε, μαγείρευε, ταξίδευε, τρέχε, άνοιγε, δείχνε, ρίχνε, φτιάχνε, ψάχνε, διάβαζε, ετοίμαζε, παίζε, άλλαζε. Now let's try to form the continuous imperative of verbs that end with ao. In this case, we will just use the ending a, and we will put the stress on the second syllable from the end. We have αγάπα, απάντα, βοήθα, ζήτα, μίλα, νίκα, γέλα. As for the plural of the continuous imperative, as we said, it's the same as the second person in plural of the present tense, so there is no point in going through the list. We have finally covered all the forms that a Greek verb can adopt. We started with the present tense, then we moved to the simple and perfect forms where we saw that just by knowing the simple subjunctive we can derive everything else. And finally, we saw the continuous forms where basically the only new thing to learn was how to form the continuous past. Remember that everything that we have covered in this video is summarized in the guide of active verbs that I prepared for you, which you can find in the description of the video. You can come back to this video or to the guide anytime and practice again and again until you finally master the Greek verbs. Αυτό ήταν το βίντεο, παιδιά. Ξέρω ότι περιέχει πολλές πληροφορίες. Στόχος δεν ήταν να τα μάθετε όλα αυτά σε μία μέρα, αλλά να έχετε μία πιο σφαιρική εικόνα για το πώς χειριζόμαστε τα ρήματα στα ελληνικά. Εάν σου άρεσε το βίντεο, μην ξεχάσεις να κάνεις ένα like και αν έχεις κάποια ερώτηση ή κάποια πρόταση για επόμενα βίντεο, πες το μου στα σχόλια. Θα τα ξαναπούμε στο επόμενο βίντεο. Γεια σου!